quick introduction. My name is Chuck. I work at Trend Micro along with David, and we're here to present you, keeping that data collaboration and work from home environment conversation going from a security perspective from Trend Micro's. How do we look at malware from infiltrating those environments? As we know, with the ongoing pandemic, things have changed. We've kind of evolved during this this pandemic process, and our traditional IT provisioning and infrastructure really just had to rapidly change kind of overnight. So when I was a technologist, it's like you had inventory, right? We carried IT inventory. We had laptops, we had desktops. We would actually onboard an employee. Here's where you're going to sit today. Here's your environment. Here's your laptop, and we had total control, had provision of the software and everything that's going to go on there, even endpoint protection, right? So what's changed is people are working from home. They are going to an electronics retailer, maybe bringing their own device, bringing their own laptop, and connecting to the work environment, right? And the work environment has changed specifically when we talk about things like file storage, right? So file storage, instead of folks tunneling back into their VPN environments on-prem, companies are evolving and moving that out to cloud file storage mediums that the major cloud providers provide. So how do we look at that and kind of, at Trend Micro, people come to us, they say, hey, defense in depth, best practice, I need an endpoint protection software. I need to actually have this rolled out on these virtual desktops maybe that we're rolling out, or VDI environments. But what we want to accomplish today is, that's all well and good. That's like a no-brainer. You definitely should do that. And we have solutions for that. But look upstream. Look at upstream at these file storage mediums that may be subscribed to downstream applications and pushing notifications and events for your employees, right? So let's look upstream, and we're going to talk about that today. So I'm going to go ahead and flip slides here. There we go. So what are we seeing? Like David and I spend a lot of time talking with customers in different industries, different size companies, anywhere from media to financial to insurance, and even small and medium business. And what we've seen in interacting with these customers as they're moving out to using cloud file storage is that this model is pretty similar, and maybe you have some relatability here for the folks on the phone. You've got public internet in play, right? To make collaboration easier, traditional model, employees are VPNing into their environment, right? To basically putting that machine on the network. Well, people are scattered out. They may be using their own device. They need to access these files through the public internet, right? And even your customers, suppliers, vendors for collaboration. So that's where cloud file storage comes into play. And usually from internal application development, you may have a downstream application that acts kind of like as a router or as a brainchild to say, hey, these files are coming in. I need to distribute these. I need to send this to a certain team to look at, for pre-processing, things like that. You can imagine that in the financial industry or insurance industry. And then that's going to actually make its way or traverse down to a user endpoint, right? That's got endpoint protection software in there. They're going to take action. Hey, I've got a notification. I'm going to click the link. The endpoint protection software kicks off, says, hey, this is malicious, right? It's doing its job. They're going to pick up the phone. They're going to call IT support. They're going to say, hey, I just clicked on the link. I can imagine IT support. We've all been there with that conversation. What? You click the link? We tell you, don't do that. Where did this come from? Well, it came internally. It came from within. It's from our internal application, our downstream application. So you can imagine from an IT perspective, they're kind of going upstream with a paddle. Where did this come in from? And finding out that it's being leaked in, that malware is coming in from cloud file storage. So that's what we're going to look at today. So just shift your focus more upstream. So David, why don't you talk about going beyond the endpoint, beyond compute, why cloud file storage is so much more important cloud needed.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And I apologize, my camera is not working. We'll figure that out at another time. But that's correct. The cloud native space today and building out your applications, and what Chuck and I do on a regular basis, is revolving around a real transition from that kind of legacy application design into more of a managed service design. And as we see here today with the likes of Microsoft and AWS and Google, they're building out a huge portfolio of managed services on a regular basis, and this is growing exponentially. But with that comes the real requirement to have deep communication between not only those cloud native applications and those managed services, but also kind of those downstream effects that Chuck was mentioning as well. And the bottom line here, the real thread that brings this all together is really the utilization of proper security methods that are required for greater visibility and control. And certainly, when we start to look at cloud file storage, there's a real requirement today as we're moving further and further into this work from home environment to be able to manage and coordinate all of this effectively. And this is really what we're going to be diving into today in this presentation. So, what are we seeing in the market? What are we, talking about when we're looking at cloud file storage? And really, there's three facts here that we want to kind of go over. The first fact is that cloud file storage is natively secured. The cloud service providers are not going to let anything come to chance. They are fully secured in terms of their capabilities around this. But we know that human error around misconfigurations can take place. We know that this can happen, and it's to no fault of the cloud service provider, but this is more of a human issue that we need to address, and it can happen, as we see within the news and within the media in the last couple of years. Secondly, public file storage access is relevant. It's needed. There's a greater requirement today, and as we were going through just a moment ago in the Microsoft presentation, we see more and more files coming through on a regular basis. And although we've had this shared, capability and the ability to really put forward with files into the cloud and into other spaces over the last decade or so, and even further, but more poignant in the last decade or so, we're seeing that exponentially grow just as a result of our kind of a stay-at-home mentality that's happening now, and that'll grow even further, even as we go back to the offices or we stay at home for a couple of days a week. But more and more systems today and applications are reliant on that virtual flow of files. And then finally, the third fact here is that cloud file storage has allowed companies to worry less. We were at a point in time just a year ago where we couldn't get into our offices. We couldn't get into those data centers. We could not get into those wired frameworks that are in the closet, so to speak, in our buildings, where we had servers or we had small database servers just there where we were typically able to access those a bit more conveniently. But there's also capacity restraints with that as well. And of course, when we move to the cloud, we can easily ramp that up, and it's far more flexible, far more easy for us to add in as much capacity as we need going forward.
Yeah, so like what David was saying with that a talk on lessons learned, things we found in the industry, I'll hit on that point about misconfigurations, because the whole idea of the talk is how does infiltration happen, right? So when we talk about security and governance and the human element, right? We're all human beings, we make mistakes, there's misconfigurations, right? You need to be aware of that. So you want to make sure that you can integrate with your public cloud provider, with that real-time monitoring, right? So you're providing real-time monitoring of any time where, if I have the means or David has the means, and we make modifications to access control rights and things like that, everybody is aware of that. And in some cases, based on company policy, you might want to provide auto remediation, right? That auto remediation takes place and it rewrites the wrong, right? And a human introduced misconfiguration. Also, since we're all in this new venture, and traditionally in this on-premise environment, with wiring closets and storage area networks and NASs and SANs, right? Those professionals are retooling and reskilling and learning about storage technologies, and to provide a knowledge base to understand how to remediate misconfigurations is also an added bonus as well when we talk about governance there. So David, with file storage security best practices, what are these three pillars here that you should look at when you're looking at inspecting files as they come in? What would we look at there from a best practice standpoint?
Well, there's really three things that we'd want to get across to most situations or most scenarios. First, the scalability and concurrent cloud scanning. So this is, again, a key to the automation process. You can imagine, as Chuck was mentioning earlier, an insurance company, for example, customers that have millions of files coming in a day on claims and other issues that they're having to deal with, and those files can be looked at in a very fast and efficient way if everything is automated, obviously. Secondly, from an anti-malware or vulnerability point of view, we want to make sure that we're looking at files of relevant size and type. So if there's limitations on the type of file that is being scanned, or there's limitations on the size of those files, that can be an impediment to the overall effectiveness of your scanning mechanism. And what I mean by that, obviously with businesses today, they could be bringing in files that are media files all the way to, you know, typical PDFs or Word docs or the like. With that in mind, they're also different in size. And so we have to be able to, you know, dissect those and take a look at those in a very different way for each scenario. And then finally, you need customizable or post-scan actions. The idea that when a file is being recognized as having an issue with it, that the person that sent it is made aware of that, if that's an appropriate tactic, and that they know that this file might not make itself through to the final destination. You also need to have actions that tell the file what to do. And of course, all this is built in with APIs and appropriate technology to make this work. And then of course, as Chuck was mentioning, there's the downstream workflow issue. So the ultimate end of this is an end user in most cases, if the file is going to be saved to a particular relevant area, or it's actually going to be opened by an end user. And if that end user's you know, endpoint security doesn't recognize it, or that file was positioned in several different areas before it made it to the end user, then you can imagine the repercussions of what that file might be able to do in terms of ransomware or other major issues. And so by being able to tell the end user that that file might not be making it to their desktop as well is pertinent to this information. So you know, combining all of these critical areas of best practices are really key to finding the best solution for you.
Yeah, and like when we look at it from a Trend Micro perspective and how we can move upstream, right? I talked about that what we're going for today is moving upstream and looking at file storage solutions such as S3. Like we'll look at an S3 bucket for an example in this architectural diagram. Is we've got this collaborative element, right? Files are being uploaded in there, and then we've got that downstream workflow. We have flexibility when we talk about deployment. I like to talk to customers about deployment, and especially when you talk about file storage security, is the best practice you can do is deploy that in the customer's environment. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, right off the bat, happens to be data sovereignty, right? So data sovereignty, you want to make sure if you're doing file scanning, you don't want to have you know, these files actually leaving the customer's environment, being scanned like a third-party resource and then being placed back in. That's not a good idea, right? And then also as a twofold approach, because for best performance, right, and scalability, by deploying cloud natively inside the customer's account, you have that elasticity, right? So this solution is deploying Lambda functions, SNS topics, and queues, which are cloud native technologies that can get elastic and they can contract back on depending on the customer's workflow, like concurrency, right? And then like David had mentioned, customizability, right, for deployment, post-scan action. So I can do something right in the middle based on the detection and move these files off to a quarantine bucket, send a notification to my IT staff or systems administrators, and then get that out of the way out of my downstream workflow so it doesn't make it to subscribed applications or even endpoints if people are mounting that file storage directly, for example. And then my clean files that are vetted, those are the ones that I close the loop, right? That's actually connecting to my downstream workflow. All done efficiently with cloud-based services in the AWS account. And then one thing I'd like to leave on with that before we get into more of a demo is threat intelligence, right? So the same solutions we have for our endpoint protection products, right? As a best practice, you should have that on your endpoint solutions. Our smart protection network from Trend Micro is now leverageable upstream into a new medium, into the file storage arena, right? So now you can move that upstream to that same inspection that we know on our endpoint protection in that new medium. So with that being said, this is just a brief screenshot of the solution of file storage security. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in real time, shall we? So I'm going to go ahead and minimize, drop out of our presentation deck for one moment. And what we're looking at here is the Trend Micro Cloud One solution. So we're talking specifically on file storage security today, but we've got 7 different services. So you may be venturing out in your business sorry, I just timed out there. You always like timeouts, right? So let me go back here. File storage security. So might be my home internet here. We're getting some storms here in Texas today. They're kind of rolling through. Let me click right back on my swatch. So I apologize for that. But yeah, like I was saying, there's 7 different services that make up. So if you were, branching out and using file storage solutions such as S3 today and starting to use more cloud native technologies, we have security solutions all in the same console here. So you can flip between the different services no matter what you're looking to inspect and protect, right? So in this case, we're looking at those cloud file storage mediums. So the easy way to deploy this, I always like to talk about deployment in the stack management screen here. I can look at my AWS accounts that are protected. If I hit the deploy button, I can easily deploy scanner and storage stacks for AWS accounts, right, to protect them and protect those buckets that I want to detect and inspect. And that's all done cloud natively through a CloudFormation template, right? I can sign into my AWS account, I can hit launch stack, and go ahead and submit the stack to be deployed. That stack formation, I'm showing this on the AWS side of the house, is you can name it accordingly, you can pick the bucket you want to scan, and if you're using encryption in play, like best practices, right, with security, we can interoperate with KMS encryption there. That's pretty much it. You just have to really only put in 3 fields, submit the template, and that stack will be created. Once that stack is finished completion, it's going to create those Lambda functions. It's going to create those SNS topics and queues inside your account to take care of the scanning functionality. Once that's deployed, you want to go ahead from a best practices standpoint and add those post-scan actions that David was talking about. So for post-scan actions, you can, and we even provide that as a best practice, we suggest that you do the promotion or quarantine, like I was saying. Get that out of the way, out of that downstream workflow, get those files to go to a quarantine bucket for further inspection, and that's not being impacted by your downstream workflows and users. That's where you want to go next. So once you have your post-scan action deployed, which is a Lambda function, you're ready to go. And let's go ahead and do like a little simulation here. I've got AWS Cloud Shell just to kind of simulate putting in files into a customer account. And if we want to go, boy, I've got the internet going on today. But if we want to go, just look upstream here, I'll talk over that while we're refreshing this. This is pretty common, right? I'm running a command line to saying, I want to copy in a file to a landing bucket. That could happen wherever, right? Customers, employees, an application actually doing that, that's doing some processing. That's going to go into that landing bucket. In this case, I'm copying in an ICAR file. So when customers try all this out themselves, this is part of the setup process. We recommend copying an ICAR test pattern file to make sure this is working. When that is put into the bucket, it will actually go into my landing bucket, and it's going to sit there and wait for the Lambda function to fire, which is within seconds, right? The Lambda function is basically ready to go, rear end ready to go. When that file lands, it does what's called an inspection, and it does a decision, right? So I've got a quarantine bucket and a promotion bucket, right? Think about that post-scan action here. So in this case, when that file has been uploaded, it's going to end up in that quarantine bucket, as we see here, because it's deemed malicious. And let's go ahead and take a look at the file from an AWS perspective and scroll on down here. And we see we're using AWS tagging. So the solution, when that Lambda function fires and does our malware inspection on there, it will go ahead and tag the file according to the date timestamp that the result was malicious and it was scanned properly, right? And then all files that are clean can go onto that promotion bucket. See, we've got a test text file in here. Same thing. This has got nothing wrong with it. There's no malicious payload on here. And you can go and say that that's actually tagged as well. You have no issues found, right? All well and good. So that's stitched on downstream to protect those work from home environments and downstream applications.
Hey, Chuck.
Yep.
Charles from PLA Cards was curious if you have file integrity monitoring or FIM built into this.
So file integrity monitoring is more in our workload security that's installed on servers, which is one other service that's included in the Cloud One spectrum, but we do have file integrity monitoring in workload. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. And we can provide some information on that if he's curious on some docs with file integrity monitoring there. No problem. But yeah, I mean, and you know, when file storage security is in place, you got your scan activity showing up here in real time as well. So this is beneficial to systems administrators that can say, hey, you know, what does my volume look like? What these buckets that I'm actually protecting, what's the volume look like on a given day to day? And then which ones are malicious and which ones are clean. So now you've got that lockstep on protecting those downstream environments. So David, you know, we went through that little brief demonstration or walkthrough. Let's go ahead and just talk about what we learned today with the demonstration, like storage security without the hassle.
Yeah, so that was a really good walkthrough of kind of the best capabilities, you know, in terms of a best practice. And what we really want to get across is that, you know, these services need to be built into your cloud native operations. And so it's key that the services themselves are built around that technology. In this case, we were showing AWS, for example. But these, you know, these steps need to be really easy to deploy. We need to get folks up and running very, very quickly so they can meet their objectives and meet their security requirements in a very constructive way. Secondly, we need to be able to make sure that there's no impediments around or hindrances or roadblocks in the file type or size. And so we don't really want people to worry too much that various files might not be scanned or various files might be overlooked. That's not the objective. The objective is to give you a very holistic view into what's happening with those scans, and of course not to create any roadblocks in terms of the scan itself, in terms of the size of the file or the type. And then finally, what's really key here is maintaining data sovereignty. And so we want to make sure that when you're scanning files, that those files aren't removed, that they're not pulled out of your account, that they don't leave kind of your domain and go elsewhere where there can be some data compliance or sovereignty issues creep into that scenario. All these kind of ideas are built into what Chuck was showing, and of course, you want to make sure that you're feeding in the right requirements so that that downstream workflow is protected from those upstream risks.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, David.
And so to kind of conclude on this and to look at this from a bit more of a pragmatic point of view, we want to make sure that you're aware that there's a free trial of this, so you can use your smartphone to check out the QR code or the link at the bottom. Of course, this is all part and parcel of our Cloud One platform. This is a security platform that's built for cloud builders and security operations folks, of course, diving into a number of different services that you can see here in this slide. But of course, if you're looking for trying this out and getting started right away, please go to this link. And of course, there's a number of different documents there that'll help you get started immediately, and we're here to help you as well. So Ron, we'll take any questions if there's anything, and thanks for allowing us to speak today.
No, that was good. Maybe one question, and I want to make sure that I get this right with regard to ransomware. And given work from home, people potentially connecting over home Wi-Fi or maybe connecting on a VPN, I'm just curious if there's anything special or special capabilities that Trend Micro offers, given the increasing risk of ransomware. It's one thing to control it if you've got people on-prem, but is there something special or different or some unique capabilities that you offer to help secure against ransomware coming in from a work-at-home employee?
Do you want to take that, Chuck, or is that?
Yeah, that's fine. We can have, from what I understand, if like the actual endpoint itself. Yeah. So I mean, we do have quite a bit of solutions at Trend Micro as far as looking at ransomware, right? So in the endpoint protection space, part of our multi-thread analysis is actually looking at not only just signature and pattern file and machine learning and things like that, but also behavior monitoring. So on like new variants of ransomware as they come out, and it actually checks the behavior. What is this doing? Is it reaching out to like a command and control server? Is it trying to do abnormal type of behavior? So we can actually detect that, and this gets our behavior analysis part of our product. And that's definitely more in the endpoint space. So if the single source agent is deployed on that endpoint, it's going to have that ransomware protection part of that product, right? It's just to configure it. It's just a click of a button. It's turning on that ransomware protection with behavioral analysis.